What's up, y'all? Dr. T. Hassan Johnson here doing a review of 2020's film Spell, starring Omari Hardwick. Um, it's an interesting film. Some twists, some things I didn't really expect. This film came out very recently, and I mean very recently. I watched it on pay-per-view. Um, Probably not what Omari Hardwick was hoping for. I mean, the brother just left Power. I think this was really going to be his big, leading film debut. I mean, he's been in film for quite a while, but still, I think this was supposed to propel him to another level. And then, COVID hit. So I hope it does well or well enough to get him some other roles. He's a good actor. I like him. I liked him in Power. I liked him in a few other things I've seen prior to that. I just don't think this film, because it was released, from what I could tell. I mean, I watched it on pay-per-view. I don't think that was the release he was really looking for. So again, I hope it goes well. But it's an interesting film. Film is about basically a black family um, who are going to a funeral in the Appalachia, right? So he plays a guy who is named Marquise T. Woods, and he's from Appalachia. And apparently, he has an abusive father. He grew up, you know, with what one might consider a somewhat, in some dimensions, a typical black upbringing. He was spanked. He was, we get the impression that it went further, but we don't see a whole lot of that. The examples of that. And now, you know what? That's not true. I apologize. He did have scars from the beating, so it does go beyond the typical beating. He didn't get just spankings, but he did have extensive scarring. So I forgot about that. Yeah. So he had an abusive relationship, and that scarred him in a particular way for life. And he sought to become successful and make sure he had a family, and his kids would know very little about that whole life. And he's successful at that. I think he becomes an attorney. His family's really, well middle classed. He has a daughter and a son, both teenage, and the family is kind of distant. They're not really connected, as with many families today. When you see them all together, they're all on their phones, they're all separate, and so I think, they're kind of playing on that and making a statement about the disconnectedness of even middle class black families in this day and age. And this is in direct contrast to his upbringing in Appalachia, with a father who was very abusive, but at the same time was trying to teach him about, you know, uh, I guess you would call it, voodoo, hoodoo, really more hoodoo. You know what I mean? He tried to teach him some elements of it, but because of their relationship, it didn't go well. So he eventually gets a call, not suggesting, but stating very clearly that his father has died. And so he decides that they're going to go to the funeral with his wife's support. His wife is played by, I think it's Lorraine Burroughs. I'd never actually seen her before, but she did fairly well. So they came across as a fairly connected couple with the same kinds of parental issues that most of us have. Kids listening to us and dealing with discipline and trying to raise your kids with some modicum of self value, all that kind of thing. So they did well, kind of portraying that family. And they decide to fly up into the Appalachian Mountains. And apparently he has it might be like a Cessna. And they fly up there. They stop to get gas, and you kind of see them having some trouble. Now, the teenage son is has some problems being bullied at school, apparently, and he has kind of a deformed middle finger on his hand. And so with that in mind, I think his name is Titan. So Titan is the teenage son, and his sister is Samsara. The wife is Viora, and then you have Marquise starring in the movie. So when they stop to get gas, uh, you know, there's a point where Titan meets a young man his own age who lives up that way, and there's some tension back and forth. So you can tell that he's not real assured, self assured. He's not real um, certain of his himself and who he is, and so when he gets kind of bullied, he doesn't really know how to respond. And there's a moment where the young man almost steals his phone until he finds out where they're going and gives the phone back. Um, there's a sheriff that comes to, kind of what it looks like he's about to kind of harass them until again he finds out where they're going and he backs off. So they fly into the mountains, they get caught into a storm, and they crash. And from there, Marquise wakes up in the home of a character named Eloise. And Eloise is married to Earl, and they have a young man that stays with them because they're both elders. They have a young man that stays with them named Lewis, who doesn't speak, but he's kind of hulking and big, and he's somewhat their enforcer and laborer, right? So Marquise wakes up in this home. He's trying to find out where his family is and how they fare. How they fare. His foot is injured and taped up, and he is, of course, in fairly bad shape. And they won't tell him anything. They won't let him leave. And they have some tensions. Even just about him cursing. You know what I mean? Because Eloise is kind of old school, so they have some tensions about that until she introduces what she calls a boogity, which is kind of a hoodoo doll, and she makes one of for Marquise or of him. And of course, he doesn't believe in any of this. He still has a bad taste in his mouth about this in terms of growing up with his father. Um, and so, with that in mind, it becomes clear they're not going to let him go. And when he tries to get up and walk out, they call in Lewis to carry him back to his bed. So he tries to escape a couple of different times and is not really able to. He can't walk very well. His foot is can't bear any weight, hurts a great deal. But there is one point where he is able to watch a ceremony, a hoodoo ceremony that Eloise leads. And in that particular ceremony, she kind of, heals people. And what you find is she heals people by taking body parts from others and animals and using them in this ceremony associated with the hoodoo dolls that she calls again boogities, and that allows people to kind of see or whatever ails them. She's able to kind of fix. So he witnesses this, um, crawling over the roofs and looking down from one of the roofs of the barn where they have this ceremony. Crawls back into bed before Eloise gets there and whatnot. Now he does discover that part of the pain in his foot is a long, like, metal nail that's been jammed up his foot, up the heel of his foot almost. And so there's some very gross and painful moments in the film that you'll definitely see. That said, there's a point, there's even some, you know, uh, it reminded me of the film Alive, but for very different reasons. Um, there's some cannibalism that goes on, in the sense that he finds out that the soup that he's actually been enjoying, she leaves him the bones from the soup to play with, and as he spreads the bones out, he realizes that they are his son's hand. So again, he doesn't know if his family's alive or not, but there's no mistaking that this son's hand that was part of the soup he ate. So he threw up at that point, but realized what it was. So that's when he starts to figure out how nefarious the people he's staying with really are, and they keep holding him, waiting for a blood ceremony, or a blood moon, and he, starts to get the impression that this is not going to be for his benefit. So that said, he manages to, I think it's probably a Sunday when they leave for the day. He's able to kind of get around the farm. He finds body parts and remnants of others, and he finds the spell room where Eloise keeps all of her materials, the books, the spells, and the body parts, and he gets a sense of what's going on, and what she actually does. And so from there, he kind of plans his rebellion and uses that as a form to escape. And as they go to conduct the final ceremony, Eloise, who I forgot to mention is played by Loretta Devine. Her husband Earl's played by John Beasley. You may not know his name, but if you look him up, you'll recognize him from other things. Um, it turns out that she's saving Marquise to give his heart to um, her husband. So they've been saving him to use his body parts. And one of the things he also finds out is when he's going through her spell room that they've all been alive since at least 1860. They were old, in 1860. They were about the same age they are now. So he kind of gets the sense that these people have been around since slavery, using these means. But because of what he learned from his father, he's able to turn the tables on him and plan his kind of escape. But once he's taken to the ceremony where he's planning his escape, that's when he sees his family, and they're all kind of they're alive but kind of catatonic because of this kind of mist that they blow into your face, and he's had the same thing happen. So from there he's kind of able to initiate the escape, and he and somewhat like it very much it reminded me of what is it called? What was the other horror film called that came out not too long ago? Memory is getting Get Out. It reminded me of Get Out. In that, he's trying to escape. He's lost in this area. He doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know where anyone else he knows is. And so, he's kind of stuck out there with people that are acting strange. And so it was reminiscent of that. And the ending to Spell was very much like the ending to Get Out. It was like a video game. You had to deal with each person all the way up, like to get to the boss level, to deal with Eloise, whom he vanquishes and burns alive. So you get to see how he does that. But in all of this, there were some interesting overtones that I thought were important. And one of the overtones is aside from the whole notion of the family, the current modern family being disconnected, and Eloise's family were really more connected than they, even though they've been around since slavery and they're using people and eating them and using their body parts. They still had more of a connection than the current the middle class family. So there was an interesting kind of contrast there. The other thing was the dynamic with fathers and sons. Right. So, Marquise's father is abusive, and yet what he learned from his father ends up becoming useful in saving his life. Even though he doesn't believe, in any of this kind of hoodoo, that's still what he learns from his father about hoodoo is what ends up kind of saving his life. And in turn, he's able to save his son. Even though his son and he are not really connected, they're kind of disconnected. He's able to save his son because of that kind of, what he's able to learn from his father. So there's an interesting narrative here between black fathers and sons. Even though abusive, there's still redemptive relationships. And even if distance, there's still opportunity. So even though his son has been injured, he's had his hand cut off, he's alive, and his father is able to rescue him and, kind of connect with him in a particular way. So there's an interesting narrative there, I would say, about fathers and sons. The other thing, there's this moment, this theme where his son is being bullied all throughout. And in a way, Marquise is bullied by Eloise and Earl, but most particularly by Eloise or Eloise, excuse me. And so there's an interesting kind of lesson there for his son. He ends up because earlier on when his wife tries to get him to deal with his son in terms of abuse, he kind of blows it off. It's social media abuse. It's not really, physical. So he kind of dismisses it in a particular way. But then he comes into his own experience of being abused in a particular way, and he ends up kind of modeling for his son how to fight back. How aware his son is of all that, they didn't really kind of say, but it kind of goes there. And even though Marquise is kind of oblivious about his family's, issues and the things that are going on with each one of them, um, he ends up getting them into the situation in the first place in terms of crashing the plane. And so by rescuing them, there's a kind of redemptive aspect to the black father, right? The black father redeeming his family, saving his family, which goes against so much in popular culture today, where so much is about black men being absent or black men somehow being the cause of everybody else's pain. He is kind of accidentally the cause by crashing the plane, and everybody kind of gets kidnapped by this cult up there, and he's isolated from them and doesn't even know if they're alive most of the film. But the redemptive end, where he not only saves the family, but goes so far as to, vanquish the primary villain, the primary figures who are behind this, all of that says something symbolically about the value of Black men, particularly in the family. And speaking of that, that brings me to, the major kind of underlying theme that I think plays into this film, which is something I haven't really seen in a film since the last Star Wars trilogy, which has this. And I talk about the last Star Wars Trinity. I mean, the second film most particularly. There's a kind of patriarchy versus matriarchy narrative that goes on, very subtle, right? In the Star Wars series, it takes place because most of the rebellion seemed to be women in this last trilogy. Um, and most of the new empire seem to be men. So there's this kind of masculine versus feminine, patriarchy versus matriarchy, leadership model things going on that contrast the two. And even the heroes in the Star Wars series are the men in particular. They're all men who routinely take orders from women. So there's still this patriarchy versus matriarchy dynamic, despite whether there are men and women involved. And there are men and women, obviously, on both sides of that. There's something similar here, at least in the general sense, in that Marquise, even though he's disconnected from the family, he's still the head of his household. He's still the primary decision maker, primary breadwinner. Eloise, on the other hand, is the head of her household. So they've been around since slavery. She has a very domineering spirit, um, very much in control. Earl and Lewis, the two men she lives there with, her husband and whoever. They don't really say if Lewis is her son, but those two. I think at one point they did say Lewis used to work in the house during slavery. But um, anyway, the point being that both of those men follow her directive. So it's very much a matriarchal framework in the house that Eloise runs, and a patriarchal framework with Marquise and his family. And so the two kind of come head to head. And one of the things we see most in this era is the value of women's leadership models, right? Women in charge. And so what you end up having is women are usually smarter, better, stronger, more capable, and men are usually kind of stumbling and have to figure out how to catch up to where she is. And in many instances, a lot of the kind of narratives that come out today suggest that we need to follow women's lead. And the kind of sub theme to a lot of films and television shows now is that the difficulties that come about in people's lives often comes about because they don't listen to women. This is actually an opposite kind of take, where you have Marquise, who really has to come to terms with the lessons from his father, right? His abusive father, who left him with scars. So there's an interesting narrative there where the salvation comes about from listening to the father, even though the relationship wasn't sound, and that becoming the key to fighting against this kind of oppressive matriarchy, this matriarchal figure in Eloise. So Loretta Devine, does a fairly good job playing Eloise. John Beasley does a good job as her husband. And so I think in that regard, it's interesting. Like I said, I think Omari Hardwick did well. I just don't think that this is exactly what he was planning, because this, I can't help but think that he was hoping this would be in theaters and he would get the proper launch that I think he was preparing for, especially after Power. Now I noticed there's still a lot they didn't show with him at the end of Power, so I don't know if some kind of way he's coming back in the sequel series. I have no idea. I kind of stopped watching after Power because I was really drawn to his character. But I will say, I hope his career thrives. He's a good actor. Anyway, that's my review of Spell. Check it out. Now, as you guys know, this film series is about fathers and really parents and sons using film to dialogue. And one of the things that I think I would get across, I would use the story with Marquise's son and being bullied and having the kind of redemptive capacity to respond and stand up for yourself coming from the father, right? So Marquise finally accepts his father's guidance, and Titan can finally accept Marquise's guidance because Marquise, unlike his father, comes back for him. He saves him. He's able to redeem him. And so there's an opportunity for Titan to be able to be whole in a way that Marquise had to struggle to be. I think what I would communicate to my child watching Spell is the importance of the father, the importance of logic, the importance of masculine tendencies, logic, um, prioritizing outcome over emotion, right? You know, what needs to happen over what feels good. These are, and these are not, I'm not saying these aren't things that women can do. That's not my point. What I am saying is these are generally traits that are associated with masculinity. They're masculine traits, and they're masculine for a reason, because they tend to be what men are known for. Does that mean that all men do it? No. Does that mean all women can't do it? No. It just means that these are the traits that are more associated with masculinity, because it tends to be what men do in general. And so I think the narratives in the film advocating for the father as the model for the son is important. And I would communicate to my son upon watching this the importance of that. You know what I mean? And talking to him about the lessons that I learned from father figures. Now I can say I learned many of those lessons from my father, even though we weren't close for a good portion of my life. But still, I can talk about learning them from father figures as well. And some of those father figures may have even been from film or literature. You know, it's not necessarily where they came from; it's what they parted with, what they, put into me, and what I was able to absorb about manhood, about being men, about what that means about my responsibilities, my obligations, my relationships, and yet at the same time how to, stand up for yourself in applying those lessons in life and dealing with other people and situations. So I would definitely kind of highlight the importance of that and use Marquise as an example, right? Who stands up for himself over and over again, although everyone's telling him not to, doing what he knows to be right, following through, but most importantly, fighting back not only for himself, but mainly for those he cares for, right? And his family, right? So, anyway, that's where I would go with that. Hope you enjoyed, hope it's useful, and definitely give me some feedback, all right? Peace.